This is a video of me drawing a portrait that has been speeded up to 1/6 of the time it took to do the drawing. I began drawing the figure from life using ink and brush in late 2008. I had been making oil paintings of Americana scenes, including politicians and political scenes and state fair scenes, for several years. I had begun to leave parts of the canvases unfinished. I wanted to explore line, to understand line as best I could, so I joined this informal drawing group. At first, I was interested in the figure as abstract shapes. I often left heads off. I looked at the outlines and drew those. I looked at shadows and drew those. I would look at light areas and draw with white ink on black paper. I looked at positive and negative spaces and considered how to compose them on the paper. After drawing the figure for a couple of years, I had an opportunity to show some of my drawings to a curator friend, and she indicated one drawing and said, "I like this one because it shows the model's personality." I thought, well, maybe I should look at the models differently and more as individuals and think about their personalities rather than the abstract shapes. So how would that change my art? I began really paying attention to people in our drawing group, both the drawers and the models. I realized it was a constantly changing community of people who were creative, who cared about art, and who were leading their own separate lives. An artist studio can be very solitary. This group connects me to society and social issues. I have an opportunity to get to know people who range in age from high school to their 80s. It's a mix of ages, economic levels, people of color, different gender orientations, and so on. It's a real opportunity to hear what's going on in society and politics from different points of view, often because of a model's age, body type, hairstyle, tattoos, race, clothes, attitude, and so on. The drawings are very contemporary and may be seen as socially or politically relevant. Using ink and brush makes my style of drawing somewhat different than people using other media. Often, when a pose begins, I immediately hear the scratching noises of pencils and charcoal and other things on paper. So since my media doesn't allow for any erasure, I just tend to spend a bit more time just looking at the figure and imagining what to draw on my paper. Will I concentrate on the head and shoulders, the head to the waist, the full figure? What will the finished composition look like? I really try to visualize it on the paper. You may have noticed at the beginning of this video, I began by making a few small dots on the paper. I was indicating where the top of the head would be, where the chin would be, and where the eyes would be. This gives me a rough indication of the scale and where I'm going with the drawing. From time to time, I use my brush to measure parts of the figure. I usually start with the head. If the model's face is toward me, I can decide where the eyes will be and begin to draw them. Everything is relative to the pose. If the model's head is pointed up, the distance from the eyes to the top of the head will be less than the distance from the eyes to the chin. If the model's head is pointing down, it will be just the opposite. I use the head as a measurement to judge other body parts. How many heads high is this particular standing figure, for example? Throughout the drawing process, I go back and measure many times. You may notice that the entire time I've been drawing this portrait that I've used only one brush. By controlling how much of the brush touches the paper, how much ink is on the brush, the direction of the stroke, and the angle of the brush, etc., I can make tiny dots, thin lines, or bold strokes. The entire portrait is created with this single brush. Also, note how I have kept my left hand off the wet ink. My right hand is off the paper so I don't smear the ink. Sometimes I drop my right little finger into an area I know is dry to serve as a stabilized kickstand while I draw a delicate line. Time plays an important role in drawing from life. No matter how good a model is at maintaining a pose, there is always some movement. A model tends to settle into a pose after a time. Drawers have to interact with the model to keep coming back to the pose. Artists have to deal with a pose that has changed a bit. Do you leave what you've drawn and draw new lines? Do you live with distortion and keep going? I'd have to say that it's taken me years to embrace distortion as an opportunity to do something that's really different and interesting rather than to feel discouraged by it. Time also has an effect on light. No matter what time of day you begin drawing, if you're using entirely or partially natural light, the light changes. Clouds come and go. The sun moves across the sky, and the shadows on the model lighten or deepen or subtly change direction. I find the practice of drawing from life really connects me to artists who have come before me. I've studied drawings and prints made by many famous artists, and they inform my art in different ways. When I look at Rembrandt etchings, I love how so many marks seem to be random patterns, yet are perfectly placed to define a person. When I look at prints and drawings by George Grosz, I'm struck by their political content. When I look at prints and paintings by Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec, I love how spontaneous they seem. I like how Richard Diebenkorn divides the space of the background and combines it with the pose of the model so it feels like divisions of space in his abstract paintings. When I was a kid, I liked to read the comics in the Sunday newspaper. I would read some of the comics and think they were funny and not think about the style of the drawing at all. But I was always stopped when I turned the page and came to Prince Valiant by Hal Foster. I never read the story, but I loved the visuals. They were so real and detailed. Another of my favorite comic artists is Jack Kirby, who is one of the co-creators of Captain America, the Hulk, Fantastic Four, the X-Men, and other famous superheroes. So what am I trying to accomplish with my figure drawing? I want to create works of art that are relevant today because of the uniqueness and story of each of the models. I want to continue to develop a style that is unique to me. I've sometimes consciously worked on drawings a certain way. After seeing an exhibit by Anders Zorn, for example, I spent time using parallel lines to define shadows. After thinking about abstract expressionists' work, I've used bolder, thicker strokes. I felt for a long time that eventually I will arrive at a combination of line and other marks that is my own. The variety of marks I make in a drawing has drastically increased. Now the choice of marks can push the feeling of each drawing in a different direction. After making hundreds and hundreds of drawings, I have a visual vocabulary more unique to me. It wasn't until I began to consider offering my drawings in solo and two-person shows that I began to expand my drawings in significant ways. Up until that time, I've been using one color of ink on half-sheet paper. When I visualized what that would look like in a gallery, I thought, no matter how good each piece is, it will be a boring show. I began to do more complex work on full sheets of paper. I began to do some work on double sheet size paper. I began to add color to drawings. I began to transfer some compositions to canvases about 4 feet by 6 feet. It was this visualization of what I wanted a gallery show to look like, whether it was in a gallery or an art center or a museum, that I really opened up to the variety for my drawings. I've also wanted to push the figure drawing in a different conceptual direction at times. I created a series called Halo, where I combined the figure with objects that represent different, sometimes iconic aspects of people's individual lives and society. I created a series called Personals, where I combined the figure with words and phrases that elicit thinking about relationships. Poses typically vary from 20 minutes to 1 hour and 45 minutes. Responding to each of the lengths of these poses adds to my body of work. Some quicker poses require quicker decisions, such as how much of the figure should I draw, how should I fit it on the page, and what to complete and what to leave incomplete. Some of the longer poses allow more in-depth observations and experimentation with different kinds of mark making.